Welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. Well, normally on these episodes, we're out here taking stuff out of primary accounts and showing you how to do things. Today, we're going to take a minute and talk to you about some of my favorite Union enlisted accounts that we pull some of these ideas from. Why? Well, not all of you are interested in living history or have the ability to get out and experience history this way, and I want you to get a chance to experience it another way. A great way to find a connection to history is a good book. I'm going to talk to you today about 5 of my favorite accounts from the war. All of these are Union enlisted accounts, which is the reason I'm doing them in this camp. We'll go from 5 to 1. Let's go ahead and start with a soldier's story of the Siege of Vicksburg from the diary of Osborne H Oldroyd. This is a part of Oldroyd's diary. We'll put a link below to where you can find this book. We used it and were introduced to it by Silas Tackett when we used it in the Coffee on Campaign episode. There's a lot of great rich ideas about what Oldroyd was doing through the Vicksburg campaign here. Moving on to number 4, and I know some people will consider this a number 1 read for them, Leander Stillwell. His account is called Sergeant Stillwell, The Experiences of a Union Army Soldier in the 61st Illinois. Another Western theater account. Stillwell's writing is just rich and it really takes you into the moment there. He looks at the war from the ranks. He talks about soldiers being knocked over like windrows. I was rereading some of his stuff from Shiloh last night. All right, let's move to number 3. One of my favorites here is Army Life in Virginia, the Civil War letters of George G. Benedict. George Benedict did a lot of writing in the state of Vermont after the war and was well known in veteran circles. These are letters he wrote during the war. The 12th Vermont is a little bit different than many of the volunteer regiments during the war in that they were a 9-month regiment and they had a lot of newspapermen volunteer to serve with them. George Benedict was one of those newspapermen, and he wrote letters back to the Burlington Free Press that were published. These are those letters. One of the letters is fantastic. It tells all about a day in the Army camp from reveille to the end of the day. It's a great read to get an idea what it was like when the soldiers were in camp. Only being here for 9 months, it's a little bit of a different story. He does receive a promotion to lieutenant later in, but of the multiple newspapermen who volunteered with the 12th Vermont, he's the only one to volunteer as an enlisted man, making this an interesting look at the war. Okay, number 2 is a big one for me, and it's a newer source we have available to us. Patricia Camburn-Zick, who is a published author, went ahead and also published her ancestors' memoirs of the Civil War. This is the Civil War Journal from the 2nd Michigan Infantry by Harmon Camburn. We're going to do an episode later today out of this book. We've used it for primary research for some short films. Camburn had to build 4 different sets of winter quarters throughout the years he was in the war. He talks about each of those. He interfaced with several senior officers, including sharing food on the peninsula with one of the generals, offering hardtack as he saw they were almost out of food. Well, the general had rice, and the sergeant and his mess and the general and his staff messed together for breakfast that day. There's a lot of interesting accounts in here from the war. Finally, if you're going to talk about enlisted accounts of the war, we got to go to the granddaddy of them all, Hardtack and Coffee, or The Unwritten Story of Army Life by John D. Billings from the 10th Massachusetts Battery. This is considered seminal reading if you want to find out what the experience was like for Union soldiers. Days in camp, punishment, music, everything's in here. The one thing I will say is if you're looking for infantry information, Billings was in the artillery, so as you look in here, he writes down the music, and there's pictures in here of sheet music showing the bugle calls. Those are artillery calls. Still, it's a great account of what it was like to be an enlisted man in the war during the Civil War. You look at these 5, you get a really nice range of enlisted accounts from Union soldiers from the Civil War, and this is a great way to find out a little bit more about history. Primary source, all 5 of these men served. All 5 of these men left their thoughts. Some of the information was written during wartime. Some of it was written as memoirs afterwards. Again, we know with primary source accounts, when it's a post-war writing, we have to take it with a little bit of grain of salt and take a look at who that man was writing to. Still, 5 fantastic ways to find a connection to the Union enlisted soldier in the Civil War. Check them out, find one for yourself, enjoy the reading, and we'll see you next time on Civil War Digital Digest.